The wind howled through the Colorado peaks like a banshee's cry, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of a killing frost. On the narrow mountain trail, a lone figure moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his weathered hands steady on the reins of his pack mule. Silas McCready had walked these treacherous paths for 15 years, but tonight something felt different. Through the swirling snow, he could make out two small figures huddled against a fallen log, their thin cloaks no match for the mountain's wrath. A woman and a child, stranded miles from any town, with death stalking them in the form of an approaching blizzard. As he drew closer, the woman's face turned toward him, and even in the dim light, something about her features struck him like a physical blow. I pulled my horse to a halt, my heart hammering against my ribs in a way that had nothing to do with the bitter cold. The woman's eyes were wide with desperation and something else I couldn't quite place. Recognition, maybe, or fear. But it was the little girl beside her who made my blood run cold. Those eyes, those unmistakable green eyes that stared back at me from my own reflection every morning. "Please, sir," the woman called out, her voice barely audible over the wind. "We're lost." I dismounted slowly, every instinct screaming that I was about to step into something that would change my life forever. "Hey there! Before we dive into this incredible journey, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from all over the world." I should have turned around right then and there, should have pointed them toward the nearest town and ridden away like I'd done countless times before when strangers needed help. But something about that little girl's face wouldn't let me move. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with tangled brown hair and those piercing green eyes that reminded me of someone I couldn't quite place. "Mom," I said, touching the brim of my hat. "Name's Silas McCready. You folks are in a heap of trouble being out here with this storm coming in." The woman struggled to her feet, clutching a tattered shawl around her shoulders. Up close, I could see she was younger than I'd first thought, maybe 30 or so, with dark hair streaked with premature grey and worry lines etched deep around her eyes. Pretty in that worn-down way that spoke of too much hardship and not enough hope. "I'm Martha Thornfield," she said, her voice trembling with cold and something else. "This is my daughter Clara. Our wagon broke an axle about 5 miles back, and we've been walking since dawn." I glanced at the darkening sky. The temperature was dropping fast, and those clouds looked ready to dump enough snow to bury a man whole. "Walking to where exactly?" "Millbrook," she said. "We have business there." The way she said it made it clear she didn't want to elaborate, and I'd learned long ago not to pry into other folks' business. But Millbrook was a good 20 miles through some of the most dangerous terrain in the Colorado Territory. Even in good weather, it was a 2-day journey on horseback. "Millbrook's too far," I said. "Storm's gonna hit within the hour. Best I can do is get you to my cabin. It's only about 3 miles up the ridge." Martha's face went pale. "Your cabin? Sir, I appreciate the offer, but we couldn't possibly—" "Ma'am," I interrupted, watching the little girl shiver beside her. "With respect, you don't have a choice. You can trust me for 1 night, or you can freeze to death on this mountain. Those are your options." The child tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, I'm scared." Martha looked down at her daughter, and I saw the exact moment when maternal instinct overrode whatever reservations she had about accepting help from a strange mountain man. "All right," she said quietly. "We'll come with you." I helped them both onto my horse, with Clara sitting in front of me and Martha behind. As we started up the narrow trail, I could feel the woman's tension radiating through her rigid posture. She held herself like someone expecting trouble, like someone who'd learned the hard way that accepting help from men usually came with a price. "So what brings you folks up into these parts?" I asked, more to break the uncomfortable silence than out of any real curiosity. "We're running," Clara piped up before her mother could answer. "From the bad man who wants to marry Mama." "Clara!" Martha's voice was sharp with warning. I felt the child's small body tense against my chest. "I'm sorry, Mama. I forgot I wasn't supposed to say. The pieces started falling into place. A woman and child, traveling alone through dangerous country, running from someone with enough power to make them flee their home. I'd seen it before, though not often in these remote mountains. Usually folks who ended up this far from civilization were running from something even worse than whatever they might find in the wilderness. "This bad man got a name?" I asked. Martha was quiet for so long I didn't think she was going to answer. Finally, she said, "Jeremiah Colfax. He owns the lumber mill in Millbrook. My late husband, owed him money. Now he says I can work off the debt by becoming his wife." I'd heard of Colfax, rich, powerful, and mean as a rattlesnake, from what the occasional trader told me. The kind of man who thought money gave him the right to take whatever he wanted, including women who couldn't defend themselves. "And you'd rather take your chances in the mountains than marry him," I said. "I'd rather die," Martha replied, and the steel in her voice told me she meant every word. We rode in silence after that, the only sounds the wind through the pines and the steady clop of my horse's hooves on the rocky trail. My cabin came into view just as the first fat snowflakes started to fall, and I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. We'd made it before the worst of the storm hit. I helped them down and quickly got my horse settled in the small lean-to I'd built behind the cabin. When I opened the door, Martha and Clara were standing uncertainly in the main room, looking around at my sparse accommodations with wide eyes. "It ain't much," I said, hanging my coat on a peg by the door, "but it's warm and dry." The cabin was simple but solid, built to withstand the harsh mountain winters. One large room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A ladder led to a small loft where I slept, and there was a tiny room off the back that I used for storage. Clara had wandered over to the fireplace and was staring up at the rifle mounted above the mantel. "Are you a hunter, Mr. Silas?" "I am," I said, kneeling to start a fire. "How'd you know?" "You move quiet, like the mountain cats Mama and I saw once, and you smell like pine trees and leather." I glanced back at Martha, who was watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and worry. "She's observant." "Too observant sometimes," Martha murmured. I got the fire going and put on a pot of coffee, then set about making a simple meal from my stores. Salt pork, beans, and cornbread wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling. As we ate, Clara chattered away about their journey, seemingly oblivious to the tension between the adults. "We had to leave our house real fast," she said, around a mouthful of beans. "Mama packed everything we could carry, but we had to leave my dollhouse behind. The bad man came to our door 3 times, and each time Mama told him to go away, but he kept coming back." "Clara, eat your supper," Martha said firmly. But the child was in full storytelling mode now. "And then, yesterday, he brought the sheriff with him, and they said we had to come with them, or they'd take me away from Mama. But Mama's really smart, and she knew about the back door, so we snuck out while they were still knocking on the front one." My hand tightened on my coffee cup. Using a child as leverage was a low move, even for a man like Colfax. "They threatened to take you away from your Mama," Clara nodded solemnly. "But Mama said we were going to find my daddy, and he would protect us from the bad man." The coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the wooden floor. Martha's face had gone white as fresh snow, and she was staring at her daughter with an expression of absolute horror. "Clara," she whispered, "what did you just say?" The little girl looked confused by the sudden tension in the room. "I said we were going to find my daddy. You said he lived in the mountains, and he was big and strong, and he would keep us safe. You said his name was Silas, just like Mr. Silas here." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I stared at the child, really looked at her for the first time. The green eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she held her head when she was thinking. "Martha," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what the hell is going on here?" Chapter 2. Martha buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with what I couldn't tell were sobs or silent laughter. Clara looked back and forth between us, her young face creased with confusion and growing fear. "Mama," she said in a small voice, "did I say something wrong?" I knelt down beside my shattered coffee cup, my hands moving automatically to clean up the mess while my mind reeled. 9 years ago. Had I been in Millbrook 9 years ago? I tried to remember, but those years after the war had blended together in a haze of whiskey and wandering. I'd done a lot of things I wasn't proud of, met a lot of people whose faces had long since faded from memory. "Martha," I said again, my voice steadier now. "Look at me." She raised her head slowly, and I saw tears streaming down her cheeks. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered. "I never meant for her to say anything. When Colfax's men came for us, I was desperate. I told her we were going to find her father in the mountains because I needed her to be brave. I needed her to believe someone would save us. But why my name?" I pressed. "Why Silas Macready?" Martha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Because I heard it once, from a trader who came through town. He mentioned a mountain man named Silas who lived up in these parts, and God help me, I thought it was perfect, remote enough that we'd never actually find you, but real enough to give Clara hope." My heart sank even as relief flooded through me. Of course, it had been too strange, too much of a coincidence. Clara wasn't my daughter. She was just a scared little girl whose mother had fed her a desperate lie to keep her moving when everything else had fallen apart. "So this is all just," I started to say, but Clara interrupted me. "But Mama, you said you knew my daddy," the child said, her voice rising with distress. "You said you met him a long time ago before I was born. You said he was kind and gentle, not like the other men who came to our house." Martha's face crumpled. "Clara, please, not now. You said he had green eyes just like mine," Clara continued, oblivious to her mother's discomfort. "And you said he was tall and had dark hair with grey at the temples. You said he worked with his hands and lived alone because he'd seen too much sadness in the world." I felt the blood drain from my face. That description, it was too specific, too accurate. I looked at Martha with new eyes, searching her features for something familiar, a memory stirred, fragmented and unclear, but there all the same. "Spring of 1866. I said slowly. "There was a fever outbreak in Millbrook. I was passing through, and they needed help burying the dead." Martha's breath hitched. "You stayed at the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson's place." The memory crystallized with sudden, painful clarity. A young woman with sad eyes and gentle hands. We'd talked through the night while the fever raged through the town, sharing stories and whiskey and something deeper than either of us had intended. In the morning, I'd left without saying goodbye, too much of a coward to face what had passed between us. "Mary," I breathed. "Your name was Mary, then?" She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mary Patterson. I was 17. Mrs. Patterson was my aunt, and I was helping her run the boarding house while her husband recovered from a broken leg. But your name now." "I married Samuel Thornfield 2 months after you left," she said quietly. "He was a good man, kind. He never asked questions about Clara's parentage, just accepted her as his own. When the fever took him 3 years ago, I kept his name." The cabin fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire and the howl of wind outside. Clara had gone very still, her young mind trying to process the adult conversation happening around her. I stared at this woman I'd known for one night 9 years ago, this woman who'd carried my child and raised her with another man's name. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Tell you what?" Martha's voice was sharp with old pain. "You left without a word. For all I knew, you'd forgotten I existed the moment you rode out of town, and even if I could have found you in these mountains, what then? Would you have wanted a wife and child? Would you have given up your solitary life to play house with a girl you'd known for one night?" The questions hit like physical blows, because I couldn't answer them. 9 years ago, I'd been a different man, broken by the war, drowning in guilt and grief, incapable of building anything that wouldn't crumble under the weight of my own darkness. She was right to think I would have run, because I probably would have. But now, looking at Clara's face, my daughter's face, I felt something shift inside my chest. Something that had been frozen for years began to thaw. "Does she know?" I asked. "She suspected," Martha admitted. "Samuel loved her like his own, but she was always asking questions about why she looked different from him. I finally told her the truth about her real father last year, but I never gave her a name, not until you needed a story that would keep her moving," I finished. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling past in thick sheets. We were well and truly snowed in now, which meant Colfax's men couldn't follow us tonight, even if they'd somehow picked up our trail. But it also meant we had nowhere to run. Clara had been quietly listening to our conversation, and now she spoke up in a small, uncertain voice. "So you really are my daddy?" I looked into those green eyes, my eyes, and felt my carefully constructed solitary world crack apart. "Yeah, little one, I think I am." She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded as if something had clicked into place. "I thought so. You have the same scar on your chin that I do." She pointed to a small mark I'd gotten from a childhood fall. "Mama said I got mine when I fell off Samuel's porch, but it's in the exact same place as yours." And just like that, the last of my doubts crumbled. This child was mine. This fierce, observant, brave little girl was my daughter, and she'd been living in the world for 8 years without me knowing she existed. "Martha," I said, my voice rough with emotion, "why are you really running to Millbrook? If Colfax is there, that's the last place you should go." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young and very frightened. "Because my husband had a brother there, Thomas Thornfield. He owns a small ranch outside town, and he wrote to me after Samuel died. Said if I ever needed help, his door was always open. I hoped he might be willing to stand up to Colfax." I shook my head. "One man against Jeremiah Colfax and his hired guns? Martha, that's suicide." "Then what do you suggest?" she snapped, desperation making her voice sharp. "I have no money, no family except Thomas, and nowhere else to go. Colfax has the sheriff in his pocket, and half the businesses in the county owe him money. There's no law that's going to protect us from him." She was right, and we both knew it. Men like Colfax were a law unto themselves in these remote territories, buying whatever justice they needed and crushing anyone who stood in their way. But there had to be another option. Some way to keep Martha and Clara safe without walking them straight into the wolf's den. "There is another way," I said slowly, the idea forming even as I spoke. "But you're not going to like it." "What?" "You could stay here, both of you. The cabin's small, but we could make it work. Colfax would never find you this far up in the mountains, and I know these peaks better than any man alive. I could keep you safe." Martha stared at me for a long moment, then shook her head. "I can't ask that of you. You don't owe us anything, Silas. The fact that you're Clara's father doesn't make you responsible for—" "The hell it doesn't," I interrupted. "She's my blood. You're the mother of my child. That makes you both my responsibility, whether I knew about it before or not." And as I said the words, I realized I meant them. For 9 years, I'd lived like a ghost haunting these mountains, convinced that I was better off alone, that I had nothing to offer anyone. But looking at Clara's hopeful face and Martha's weary strength, I felt something I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. I felt like I had something worth fighting for. This story is just getting started, and if you're enjoying this journey, take a moment to support our channel. A simple like and subscribe helps us create more tales like this one for you. And we'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. But our mountain refuge wouldn't remain secret for long. Because even as the storm raged outside, Jeremiah Colfax's men were already closing in, and they carried with them a revelation that would shatter everything I thought I knew about Martha's past. Chapter 3. I woke before dawn to the sound of horses moving through snow. Years of living alone in hostile territory had honed my instincts to a razor's edge, and something about the careful, deliberate way those hoofbeats approached set every nerve on high alert. Martha and Clara were still asleep in my bed. I'd given them the loft while I made do with blankets by the fire, but I could see Martha's eyes snap open the moment I reached for my rifle. She'd developed the same survival instincts, it seemed. "How many?" she whispered, easing herself out of bed without waking Clara. I moved to the window and peered through a gap in the shutters. 3 men on horseback, picking their way carefully up the trail in the pre-dawn gloom. Even in the dim light, I could see they were well armed and moving with the confidence of men who knew exactly where they were going. 3, I said quietly, and they know about the cabin. Martha's face went pale. "That's impossible. No one knows about this place except—" She stopped mid-sentence, her hand flying to her mouth. I saw the realization hit her like a physical blow. "Thomas," she breathed. "Oh God, Thomas told them." "Your brother-in-law?" "He must have. How else would they have found us? I wrote to him from Denver, told him we were coming through the mountains. If Colfax got to him first—" I cursed under my breath. We'd walked straight into a trap, and now we were cornered with nowhere to run. The storm had stopped during the night, but there was 3 feet of fresh snow on the ground. We'd never outrun mounted men in these conditions, especially not with a child. "Wake Clara," I said. "Get her dressed and ready to move." "Move where? You said yourself we can't outrun them." "We can't. But there's a cave system about half a mile up the ridge. If we can reach it before they breach the cabin, we might have a chance." Martha climbed back into the loft to wake our daughter, while I quickly gathered supplies: ammunition, dried meat, a small cookpot, and my heavy winter coat. Outside, I could hear the men dismounting, their voices carrying on the still mountain air. "Spread out!" one of them called. "Patterson said there's only one door, but check for back ways out." Patterson, the name hit me like ice water in my veins. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, Martha's aunt, the woman who'd given a desperate girl shelter all those years ago, had betrayed her own blood to Jeremiah Colfax. Clara climbed down from the loft, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Daddy?" she said, and the word nearly broke my heart. "What's happening?" "Bad men found us, little one," I said, helping her into her coat. "We need to leave quickly and quietly." To her credit, she didn't argue or ask more questions. She just nodded and slipped her small hand into mine, trusting me to keep her safe in a way that made my chest tight with emotion I wasn't prepared for. Martha appeared beside us, carrying the small pack she'd brought from town. "The storage room," she said. "There's a window back there, isn't there?" I nodded. "Small, but you should both fit through. I'll go first, then Clara, then you." "What about the men?" "I'll deal with them." Martha grabbed my arm. "Silas, there are 3 of them. You can't—" "I've dealt with worse odds," I said, though I wasn't as confident as I sounded. "Just get Clara to those caves. There's a narrow entrance about 50 yards up from the big pine with the lightning scar. Follow the passage back until you reach a chamber with an underground stream. Wait for me there. And if you don't come—" I met her eyes steadily. "Then you keep going. The passage connects to another cave system that comes out near Millbrook. It'll take you 2 days to walk it, but Clara can make the journey." "Daddy, no," Clara whispered, tears starting in her eyes. "Don't leave us." The sound of boots on my front porch cut off any reply I might have made. I kissed the top of Clara's head, the first time I'd ever kissed my daughter, and whispered, "I'll find you. I promise." Martha and Clara slipped into the storage room while I positioned myself behind the overturned table I'd used as a barricade. Through the window, I could see one of the men had worked his way around to cover the back of the cabin. Professional. These weren't just Colfax's usual hired muscle. "McCready!" The voice came from outside the front door. "We know you're in there, and we know you've got the woman and child. Mr. Colfax just wants to talk." I didn't bother answering. Men like these didn't come to talk, and we all knew it. "Have it your way," the voice continued. "But you should know. We've got papers from the territorial judge. Legal custody of the child. Her real father is dead, and her mother's an unfit guardian. We're taking her back to Millbrook where she belongs." The lie was smooth and well rehearsed, but it told me everything I needed to know about how far Colfax was willing to go. He wasn't just after Martha for some imagined debt. He wanted Clara too. The question was why. I heard the soft scrape of the storage room window opening, followed by nearly silent footsteps in the snow outside. Martha and Clara were away, but they'd need time to reach the caves. Time I'd have to buy with bullets and prayers. The front door exploded inward under the force of a heavy boot. I put my first shot center mass into the man who came through, watching him spin and drop. The second man dove for cover behind my woodpile, and I could hear the third one trying to force his way through the storage room window. "He's got the back way covered," the man by the woodpile shouted. "They can't have gotten far." That was when I realized these men knew about more than just my cabin. They knew about the caves, too. This wasn't just a manhunt. It was a carefully planned operation, which meant someone had given Colfax detailed information about my habits and hiding places. I put another shot into the woodpile, splintering logs and sending my attacker scrambling for better cover. Through the ruined doorway, I could see movement in the trees beyond. More men, moving to flank my position. 3 men, Martha had said, but I was counting at least 5 now, maybe 6. We'd been set up from the beginning, led into a trap so carefully constructed that we'd never stood a chance. The sound of Clara's scream from outside the cabin nearly stopped my heart. I abandoned my cover and rushed toward the storage room, but the man who'd been trying to force his way through the window was already inside, Clara's small form draped over his shoulder like a sack of grain. "Let her go," I roared, raising my rifle. The man smiled and pressed the barrel of his pistol against Clara's head. "I don't think so, Macready. See, mister, Colfax has plans for this little girl, big plans. She's just a child. Whatever Colfax wants, it's got nothing to do with her." The man's smile widened. "Oh, but that's where you're wrong. See, Mr. Colfax has been looking for this particular child for a very long time, ever since he figured out who her real daddy was." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. "What are you talking about?" "Jeremiah Colfax has a long memory, Macready, especially when it comes to the man who killed his brother during the war." The rifle nearly slipped from my numb fingers. Thomas Colfax, the Confederate colonel who'd ordered the execution of Union prisoners at Millbrook Creek. I'd put a bullet through his heart during the Battle of Glorieta Pass, and I'd never regretted it. But I'd forgotten that dead men sometimes have living brothers, brothers with money and power and very long memories for revenge. "That's right," the man continued, seeing the recognition in my eyes. "You killed Colonel Thomas Colfax in '62. His brother Jeremiah's been looking for you ever since. When he figured out you had a daughter, well, let's just say he decided the best revenge would be watching you suffer the way he did." Martha appeared behind him like an avenging angel, my skinning knife clutched in her hand. She drove the blade between his shoulder blades with a strength born of desperate motherhood, and the man dropped Clara as he fell forward, screaming. "Run!" Martha shouted, scooping Clara into her arms. "The caves!" But even as we burst through the storage room window into the snow, I could hear more men crashing through the forest around us. Colfax hadn't just sent a few hired guns. He'd brought an army, and they had us surrounded. The cave entrance was still 30 yards away when the first shot rang out, sending bark flying from a tree inches from my head. I pushed Martha and Clara behind a fallen log and returned fire, but I was vastly outnumbered and running low on ammunition. "Mama, I'm scared," Clara whimpered. "I know, baby," Martha whispered, holding her close. "But Daddy's going to get us out of this." I wished I had her confidence. With at least 6 men closing in from all sides and limited ammunition, our chances of reaching those caves were somewhere between slim and non-existent. But I'd made a promise to my daughter, and I intended to keep it even if it killed me. That was when I heard the sound that changed everything, the distant crack of a rifle from the direction of the main trail, followed by a shout of alarm from one of Colfax's men. "What the hell?" someone yelled. "We've got company!" More shots echoed across the mountainside, and I realized we weren't as alone as I'd thought. Someone else was out there. Someone with enough firepower to make Colfax's men think twice about their easy victory. I didn't know who our mysterious benefactor was, but I wasn't going to waste the distraction. "Move!" I shouted to Martha. "Now, while they're confused!" We broke from cover and ran for the caves through snow that seemed determined to drag us down. Behind us, the sound of gunfire grew more intense, and I heard men shouting orders in the confusion. Whoever had chosen to intervene in our fight, they were buying us precious time. The cave entrance was a narrow slash in the rock face, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. I pushed Clara through first, then Martha, then followed just as a bullet sparked off the stone where my head had been moments before. "Keep going!" I called, guiding them deeper into the mountain. "Don't stop until you reach the stream." But even as we stumbled through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were only delaying the inevitable. Colfax knew about the caves, which meant he probably knew about the exit near Millbrook too. We weren't escaping, we were just choosing our battleground. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, I had the sinking certainty that Jeremiah Colfax would be waiting for us with more surprises than I could possibly imagine. Doctus, Chapter 4. The caves were a labyrinth of narrow passages and hidden chambers that I'd explored over years of solitary living. In the darkness, with only the sound of an underground stream to guide us, Martha and Clara stayed close behind me as we navigated twists and turns that would confuse anyone unfamiliar with the system. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into another trap. "Silas," Martha whispered after we'd been walking for nearly an hour. The shooting outside stopped. She was right. The mountain had gone silent, which could mean our mysterious ally had driven off Colfax's men, or it could mean something much worse. In my experience, sudden silence usually meant the bad news was just beginning. Clara had been remarkably brave throughout our underground journey, but I could feel her small hand trembling in mine. 8 years old, and she'd already seen more violence and terror than most adults experienced in a lifetime. The thought of what Jeremiah Colfax intended for her made my blood boil with a rage I hadn't felt since the war. "How much farther, Daddy?" she asked quietly. "Not much longer, little one. See that light up ahead?" The passage opened into a larger chamber, where daylight filtered down through cracks in the ceiling. The underground stream pooled here before disappearing into another tunnel that would eventually carry it down the mountain. It was one of my favorite spots in the cave system. Peaceful, hidden, and with multiple escape routes if things went bad. Which, given the way this day had been going, they almost certainly would. Martha sank down onto a flat rock beside the pool, exhaustion written in every line of her face. "What happens now?" "We rest for a few minutes, then keep moving. The main passage leads down toward Millbrook, but there's a branch about half a mile ahead that comes out near the old silver mine. If we can reach that, you can stop right there, Macready." The voice echoed from the passage behind us, and I spun around with my rifle ready. A figure emerged from the shadows, not one of the men who'd attacked the cabin, but someone I recognized from wanted posters in a dozen territorial towns. Frank Dalton, gunfighter, killer, and Jeremiah Colfax's most expensive hired gun. "Dalton," I said, keeping my rifle trained on his chest. "Should have known Colfax would bring in the professionals." The man smiled, but kept his hands well away from his guns. He was tall and lean, with cold blue eyes and the kind of confidence that came from never losing a fight. "Easy there, Macready. I'm not here to kill you, at least not yet." "Then what do you want?" "I want to deliver a message from my employer. See, mister, Colfax is a civilized man. He believes in giving people choices, even when those people have wronged him." Martha had pulled Clara behind her, shielding our daughter with her own body. "What kind of choices?" Dalton's smile widened. "Smart woman. The choice is simple. Surrender the child, and you both walk away. Keep running, and I hunt you down like the animals you are." "Go to hell," I said. Now that's not very polite, especially considering what I know about your situation. Dalton pulled a folded paper from his coat. See, Mr. Colfax has been doing some research into your past, Macready. Very interesting reading. He unfolded the paper and began to read. Silas Macready, formerly Sergeant Macready of the 1st Colorado Volunteers, decorated for valor at Glorieta Pass. Also wanted for questioning in the deaths of 3 Confederate prisoners who were allegedly shot while trying to escape. My blood turned to ice. Those 3 men hadn't been trying to escape. They'd been part of Colonel Thomas Colfax's unit, and they'd been bragging about the Union prisoners they'd tortured and killed. I'd executed them in cold blood, and I'd never regretted it. That was war, I said. Was it? Because according to this report, those men were already in custody when you shot them. That makes it murder, not war. Dalton refolded the paper. Mr. Colfax has friends in the territorial government, men who'd be very interested in finally bringing you to justice for your war crimes. Martha's sharp intake of breath told me she was beginning to understand the full scope of the trap we'd walked into. Colfax hadn't just wanted revenge for his brother's death, he'd wanted to destroy me completely, and he'd been patient enough to wait 9 years for the perfect opportunity. Even if that's true, I said, what does any of this have to do with Clara? Oh, that's the beautiful part, Dalton said. See, when you're arrested for murder, what happens to your daughter? She becomes a ward of the territory, doesn't she? And who do you think will volunteer to take care of a poor orphaned child whose father was a killer and whose mother is an unfit guardian? The full horror of Colfax's plan crashed over me like an avalanche. He didn't just want me dead. He wanted Clara, too. My daughter would become his property, his weapon against me. He'd raise her to hate everything I'd ever stood for, turn her into a living reminder of his victory over the man who'd killed his brother. You're insane if you think I'll let that happen, I snarled. You don't have a choice. My men have every exit from these caves covered. The only way out is through me, and I'm not moving until you hand over the child. That was when Clara stepped out from behind her mother, her small chin raised with a defiance that reminded me so much of myself. It took my breath away. I'm not going with you, she said in a clear, strong voice. My daddy's not a bad man, and I won't let you hurt him. Dalton looked down at her with something that might have been amusement. Brave little thing, isn't she? Colfax is going to enjoy breaking that spirit. The rage that had been building inside me finally boiled over. I'd killed men for less than that threat, and Frank Dalton had just signed his own death warrant. But before I could raise my rifle, the crack of a shot echoed through the chamber. Dalton staggered, looking down at the spreading red stain on his shirt with surprise. He turned slowly, and I saw another figure emerge from a different passage, an older man with a sheriff's badge and a smoking rifle. Thomas Thornfield, Martha breathed. But how? Sorry I'm late, Thomas said, keeping his rifle trained on the dying gunfighter. Had to deal with the rest of Dalton's men first. Turns out they weren't as tough as their reputation suggested. Dalton tried to draw his gun with a shaking hand, but Thomas put another bullet in him before he could clear leather. The gunfighter collapsed beside the underground pool, his blood mixing with the clear mountain water. Thomas, I don't understand, Martha said. The men who found us, they said you told Colfax where we were. Thomas shook his head grimly. I told him all right, told him exactly what he wanted to hear while I was loading my guns and gathering some friends who don't much care for the way he's been running roughshod over folks in these parts. You set him up. Damned right I did. Soon as I got your letter, I knew Colfax would try to use me to get to you, so I fed him some information and then made sure I was in position to deal with whatever he sent up here. I stared at this man I'd never met. This brother of the husband who'd raised my daughter as his own. Why? You don't owe us anything. Thomas looked at Clara, and his weathered face softened. Samuel wrote to me about this little girl, said she was the light of his life, and he'd move heaven and earth to keep her safe. Well, Samuel's gone, but his promises aren't. He turned back to Martha. Besides, Jeremiah Colfax killed my brother. What? That fever that took Samuel 3 years ago? It wasn't natural. Colfax had been pressuring him to sell his land, and when Samuel refused, well, let's just say that Fever was awful selective about who it took and who it spared. The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Samuel Thornfield hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered by the same man who was now trying to destroy what remained of his family. Colfax's obsession with revenge had consumed everything in its path, leaving a trail of death and suffering that stretched back years. "Is it over?" Clara asked in a small voice. Thomas nodded. "It's over, little one. Colfax is dead, along with most of his men. The few who survived are in custody, and the territorial marshal is already investigating his business dealings. Turns out a lot of folks have been waiting for someone to stand up to him." I felt the weight of 9 years of guilt and loneliness begin to lift from my shoulders. My daughter was safe. The woman who'd given birth to her was free from the man who'd terrorized her. And for the first time since the war, I had something resembling a family. "What happens now?" Martha asked. I looked at her, then at Clara, then at Thomas. "Now we go home." "Where's home?" Clara wanted to know. I knelt down beside her and took her small hands in mine. "Wherever we want it to be, little one. We could stay in the mountains or move to town, or even head west to California. The choice is ours." Clara considered this with the seriousness that only children can bring to life-changing decisions. "Can we stay near Uncle Thomas? I like him, and I think he's lonely." Thomas laughed, and the sound echoed warmly through the chamber. "I'd like that very much." Martha was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "And what about us, Silas? What are we to each other now?" It was a fair question. We'd shared one night 9 years ago, and everything since then had been built on necessity and circumstance. But looking at her now, this strong, brave woman who'd protected our daughter at the cost of everything she'd known, I realized that what I felt went far deeper than obligation or shared parenthood. "I'd like to find out," I said honestly, "if you're willing." She smiled, and for the first time since I'd found them on that mountain trail, she looked truly at peace. "I think I'd like that too." Clara clapped her hands together with delight. "Does this mean we're going to be a real family?" I picked her up and held her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit in my arms. "Yeah, little one, I think it does." Indeed, as we made our way out of the caves and back into the sunlight, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in the space of a single day. This morning, I'd been a solitary mountain man with nothing to live for but survival. Tonight, I'd be sitting down to dinner with my daughter and the woman who'd given birth to her, planning a future I'd never dared to imagine. The mountains were still there, still wild and dangerous and beautiful, but they were no longer my refuge from the world. They were simply home, made richer by the family that would share them with me. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that was more than enough.